Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Behave with Sue. My name's Sue Cowney and I'm an author and teacher trainer, and I'm making a series of short videos to support trainees, NQTs, teachers and practitioners. In this second video I'm going to build on what I talked about in the first video around establishing expectations. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is how it differs in terms of the approach you use in different phases. Now, I'm really lucky in that I have worked in literally all phases. So I've worked in EYFS, I've worked in primary, and I've also worked in secondary, but these days I work a lot with adults as well. And what you very quickly realise is that establishing your expectations simply can't be the same in the different phases. So starting with the youngest children, one of the things to remember about the early years is that you won't necessarily have all the children in all day together at the same time. So some children might attend a setting 1 day, 2 days a week. Other children might be with you full time. So one of the things that's really important to do in early years is to keep revisiting your expectations. And in the preschool that I currently help to run, we revisit one of our key golden rules each week. And we refer to it every day. We refer to it in interactions with the children while they're playing. We keep referring back to it. We show what it looks like if it's not happening by modelling little scenarios. So with very young children, that repetition and reinforcement is really, really crucial because they're not going to hang on to that understanding otherwise. Now, I train teachers in both primary and secondary settings, and what I find is, generally speaking, there is a divide between how they go about establishing their expectations. It's logical, really, that there is a divide because in primary you are working with that one class of around 30 children every single day. So you know the children really well over time, but also the children know you really well. And so what a lot of teachers do in primary settings when they're establishing their expectations is that they work together with their class. So right at the start of the year, they sit down together and they draw up a list of class rules. This is how our class is going to operate. Now, I talk a lot to primary teachers about this, and if we're honest with ourselves, what tends to happen is that we end up establishing the rules we were going to establish anyway, but we just get the kids to work along in establishing those rules with us. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think we need to be honest with ourselves about we're not actually giving the children free rein. We are actually establishing that these are the rules, this is how our classroom's going to run, this is what I expect to see of you. And I think a good tip for primary colleagues is to make sure, particularly when you're brand new to teaching, that your willingness to work with the class to create a set of rules or expectations doesn't come across slightly as you being unsure about what those expectations should look like. A lovely idea that I've picked up from primary colleagues over the years is to create a class charter together and to get the children to sign up to it in some way. So that might be putting a fingerprint on your class charter, it might be signing their names, it might be a lovely display of handprints on which they write your golden rules. Now, it's a very different matter in secondary because many teachers will see a large number of children over the course of each week. Depending on the subject that you're teaching, you might see less children, for instance, if you're a core subject like maths or English or science. But if you're teaching something like drama or PE, you could well be teaching upwards of 200 or 300 children each week. And so again, it seems logical, doesn't it, that in secondary there tends to be less of the discuss with the class and let's figure it out together, and more of the these are my 3 expectations, or however many you've chosen to establish, and now let's just get on with the learning. I think something else to bear in mind for secondary is that it's not the first time that your children have heard this. So with expectations, it's not a case that the children don't know what the rules should be. It's more about whether they struggle to follow them or whether they just don't want to follow them. And establishing your expectations is still important because you still have to make it clear that you know where the line is and you're not going to let them cross it. But at the same time, don't imagine that they haven't heard this conversation a million times before. Something that's really interesting about expectations is that we're never in that first lesson to see other people set theirs. And I always think it would be quite interesting for people to see other teachers actually doing it. And a really useful exercise for you can be to just talk with your colleagues about how they go about it. And some of the differences can be really quite amusing. For instance, I once met a teacher in a sixth form college, and he said, "This is how I do it." He said, "I go into my first lesson with the sixth formers and I draw a line on the board. And I turn to the class and I say, 'What's that?' And they look at me and they're a bit puzzled. They think, am I having a joke or something?" And eventually somebody pipes up, "Well, it's a line, sir." And he looks at them and he says, "That's right. And just make sure you don't step across it." So as you can see from this second episode, there are all kinds of different ways to establish your expectations. So please don't feel that you're doing it right or wrong. It's up to you to figure out what's going to work for you, your children, and your context. That's the end of episode 2, and I hope to see you back here again tomorrow.